Hey, it's Mrs. Shoepard. You know how last week we did some drawings of some turtles? That gave me a really great idea for drawing and painting a sea turtle. So today I'm going to show you how to draw a sea turtle, and if you have paints at home, then you can paint your sea turtle. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to be drawing my sea turtle on watercolor paper because eventually I want to paint this with watercolor paint. If you don't have any watercolor paper at home, try to find the thickest paper that you have so that if you want to paint it, you can. If you already know that you don't have paints at home, then just choose whatever kind of paper you have available and you can do the drawing portion of this lesson. So let's get started drawing our sea turtle. So the sea turtle's shell is going to take up most of the paper, and also he's going to have one of his flippers right here in the front. So we're going to start with the head right here in this area so we know we have enough room for his shell and his flipper. So the head of the sea turtle is going to be curved here at the top, and it's going to come down into his mouth, which curves around, and it's kind of like a straight line here, and then this line continues to curve back to where his shell would start back here. So this is just the top of his mouth. We're actually going to draw the bottom of his mouth. It's going to start here and come down. And I am trying to draw somewhat lightly so that when I paint, I'm not going to see a lot of my pencil lines. The idea of drawing something first before you paint it is so that you have a guide of where you're going to put the colors and where you're going to put the paintbrush. But ultimately, you don't really want to see the pencil lines after you have the painting finished. We're going to start at the back of his head, and we're going to draw his shell, which is going to come up first, then curve around, and then come down almost all the way to the bottom of the paper. And then the rest of his shell, the bottom of his shell here, is going to curve down and connect back here. All right, so now we have his shell, and we need to do the bottom of his body, or the bottom of his shell. This would be where his head comes out of the shell, and this would kind of be like the bottom part of his shell, which is going to come down. And we'll stop right here only because I think that's where, actually we might have gone a little bit too far, but I think we're going to put his flipper right here. So we'll stop right here with the bottom of his shell, and we'll continue it back here once we see how big the flipper gets. All right, so this flipper that we're going to draw up here is going to start almost right here, kind of like where his neck would be, because this flipper is going to be coming out the other side of his body. So we're going to draw this flipper kind of small. It's going to come up first, curve, and then come around and down. And here's the other side of the flipper, and then it will connect down here. All right, so we have one smaller flipper that's coming out on the other side of his body, and then on this side of his body, we're going to have a bigger flipper because it's closer to you. If you were looking at this sea turtle in real life, this flipper would be closer to you, so it would need to be bigger. All the way down to the bottom of your paper. All right, and we did have this line come a little bit too far, so we're going to erase it. And then we're going to continue it on the other side of the flipper and connect it to his shell. All right, we don't want to forget his tail back here. It's going to be coming out from the back of his shell. And then we're going to add some details. So we have the basic shape of the turtle, and now we want to add some details and some patterns. So for his face, Sea turtles sometimes have this pattern that is almost like a nose that comes right here. So start at the side of his face and curve up and then come back down. That's almost like a nose. And then for his eye, it's kind of slanted. It's like a thin little sliver, almost like a football. So a football is a curved line on the top and a curved line on the bottom. And then we're gonna do some skin that would be around his eye. So curve around the top and then curve around the bottom. So this area is kind of like the eyeball, and this is kind of like the eyelid, so that when he blinks, this skin right here is gonna close. Now we need to do some patterns on his head. So sea turtles have patterns that aren't exactly the same. So they don't all have to be the same shape. They're not really gonna be like a hexagon or an octagon or anything like that. They're gonna be more free form. We call those organic shapes. If they're not gonna be a specific shape that we know, like not a circle, not a triangle, then those are called organic shapes. So we're gonna draw some organic shapes around the back of his head until we get here to the back of his head. Then we're gonna stop. So those are the patterns. Are gonna be kind of smaller. Whoops. And then when we do the patterns on his shell and on his flippers, those are gonna be a lot bigger. So back here, we need to draw some patterns. We're gonna draw some organic shapes that are gonna go all the way along the bottom of his shell. So starting here, just draw some of those random shapes until you get down to the back of his shell. Then you want to have some of the shapes connect to the top of his shell, and they can kind of be bigger all the way back to the back. And then we're going to draw a few really big ones right here in the middle. And then we're going to move on to the patterns on his flippers. We're going to do one row along the bottom. Make sure you have a little bit of space in between each one, because this area we're gonna use as a guide for when we're painting. So leave some space in between each one and do another row on this side of the flipper. And then we're gonna do a few rows of patterns in between, like that. All right, now we have one more flipper to do patterns on. One row on the top of the flipper. And we're going to do a few more in here. And then that's where we're going to stop for that flipper. So now we actually have everything drawn that we need to draw, so we can go ahead and start painting our sea turtle. Okay, the things that you need for painting are a little cup of water, paper towel, brushes, and some paint. So you can use whatever kind of paint you have at home. I'm going to be using watercolor paint. I like to use the Crayola brand, but like I said, whatever you have, it's great. If you don't have any paint at home, you could always color your sea turtle with crayons or markers or colored pencils, whatever you have at home. If you have more than one paintbrush, that would be helpful, because sometimes you need larger paintbrush for larger areas and sometimes you need smaller paintbrushes for little details. Make sure that you have a paper towel for wiping your brush, or if you have any accidents or spills. And then for your cup of water, I would recommend not using a cup that you would use for drinking. Use a cup that maybe you can throw away later, like a paper cup or a styrofoam cup. I'm just using a cup that comes from the cupcake wrappers when you're making cupcakes. Once you use up all the wrappers, you have a nice little cup that you can use to put water in. You're going to need water for watercolors or else they're not going to work. But you would also need water if you're using a different kind of paint so that you can rinse your brush in between the colors so you're not mixing your colors together. All right, so let's go ahead and get started painting. If you're going to be painting the background, which I'm not going to be doing today, but if you plan on painting the background behind your sea turtle, make sure that what you paint on top of the sea turtle is dry first so that those colors don't run together. All right, so let's start with some smaller details on the face. And when you're using watercolors, you have to dip your brush in the water first before you go on to the paints or else it doesn't work. And you have to get the paint into the brush, so in order to do that, you have to swirl it around. Once you do that, then you'll be able to paint inside of your pencil lines and even maybe kind of go over top of your pencil lines, because like I said before, the idea is to not see those pencil lines when you're all done painting. So try to cover up the pencil lines with paint if you can. All right, that's the only place that I'm gonna need black, so I'm gonna rinse my brush, and I want the patterns on my sea turtle to be a little bit blue and a little bit green. So I'm going to get some green on my brush, and I'm going to paint some green in here first. And since I don't want to mix the green with the blue inside of the tray, because I don't want those two colors to get mixed together in there, you're going to be mixing, or I am going to be mixing those colors on my paper. So I add one color first, whichever color you want. You don't have to do green. I'm just choosing green because I like green and because sea turtles are kind of like ocean colors. And once you have that color on your paper, you can rinse that off your brush and you can swirl into the second color that you want to add, and you just paint right over top of what you have. And I think I got a little bit too much blue on my paintbrush, so this first shape that I painted is kind of dark blue, and now when I go on to the other ones, you can't even hardly see the blue. So that might happen to you also, and that's okay. There's a couple of things that you can do to fix it. You can rinse your brush and don't put any paint on it and try to soak up some of the paint from in there and then spread that to the other shapes. The other thing that you can do is use your paper towel, and you just dip the paper towel into the shape, and look, it soaked it up. So the paint is now in the paper towel, and now you can go back and add whatever color you want over top of where you took it away. Just a couple of tricks that you can do with your watercolor paint. That trick is probably not going to work if you're using a different kind of paint. If you're using a different kind of paint, you might have to kind of wipe it away a little bit instead of just letting the paper towel soak it up. You might have to actually wipe it away, which is fine too, but just make sure that whatever's left over gets painted over top of. All right, so let's see what color we want to do for around the eye. Let's put a little bit of blue. Ooh, that wound up being a lot of blue. Try to get a little bit lighter blue by adding more water. And maybe a little bit of purple. All right, and let's let's do some green and trace over the line for the nose. And trace over the line for the mouth. All right, I'm gonna let the colors on the head dry for a few minutes while I'm painting the rest of the turtle so that I can go back and add different colors behind the colors that I just painted. If I try to paint those colors right now, where it's white right here, if I try to put paint right there, that's just going to ruin the colors that I have right now. So what I have right now, I'm just gonna let that dry. And actually, I might even try to take away a little bit of the blue here because it looks like it just is a little bit too dark. And when I want to make it a little bit lighter, I can just soak up some of that paint with a paper towel. There we go, that looks better. Okay, so moving on to the rest of the turtle. You can really do whatever colors you want. I'm just going to start off with some green, just like I did with the patterns on the head. And some of these can be green, and some of them can be blue, and some of them can be purple. We can add some different colors down towards the bottom of the shell, and we can just kind of experiment with what colors we think looks good. Remember, try to get your paint to cover up those pencil lines. So I'm trying to stay inside the lines as best as I can, but also trying to cover up some of the lines so that maybe when the paint dries, we won't see those pencil lines so much. Okay, so I think I've decided that I want to use some green to trace over some of the pencil lines that I haven't painted yet. I think I'm going to do a dark green line for the bottom of the shell. And it doesn't have to be exactly straight, but that's going to help us divide the colors that we paint for the body and divide the colors that we paint for the shell. I'm going to do a line right here that's going to be the flipper that was the line for the flipper up here, and also the line for the flipper here, so that you can kind of separate that from the body also. And let me go ahead and trace the line for the flipper down here as well. And I'm just going to connect it around to that first pattern right there and then stop. Let me go ahead and do green for, actually, you know what? That should be good. Let's just stop there with the outlining, because I think the rest of it will get filled in with some colors. So since we painted this first, this area should just about be dry, although I did just stick my finger in some wet paint up there. But most of this area should be dry enough for us to paint the rest of the head. And then this area down here is still drying, so hopefully that will be drying enough by the time we're done painting the head and we can continue on. Again, you don't want to be painting any background colors in behind any of the patterns until they are dry. The reason for that is because you don't want your background colors to mix with the colors on your patterns, because that's going to make it look a little bit messy. Unless you want it to look messy, then go ahead. If you want it to look messy, go ahead and just paint all of it at the same time, and it shouldn't really matter if your colors are blending together. Let's start out with some green up here in the nose, and right now it's like the same color as the outline, so let's mix some blue in there, and then that way it is going to show a little bit different color than the outline that we already did. Alright, so the nose is done. Let's get a little bit more green on our brush, and we're going to go down here and maybe add in a little bit of yellow. I added a little bit of yellow in with the green, and then I used the paper towel to dab a little bit of the paint back off the paper because it was looking a little dark here and here. So I was trying to get it a little bit lighter. And now what I'm going to try to do is see how well this goes. You want to try to have a little bit of a white outline around all of your patterns, including the ones on the head, the shell, and the fins. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to try to paint some green around the patterns, but trying to keep a little bit of a white outline around each of the organic shapes that we painted. So you're going to want to use a small brush and try to go in and around all of the patterns, but trying to keep a little white outline around each of the shapes. Alright, once you have a little white outline around each of your shapes, then you're going to go ahead and use whatever color you'd like. I'm just going to use probably a little bit of yellow and maybe mix in a little bit of blue. And I'm going to continue filling in the color for the rest of the head. You just don't want whatever color you use to be exactly the same as the color that you use for the pattern. So I did already use blue and green mixed together. So actually I'm kind of liking this light green that's happening. So I might just stick with that and not mix any other color with it, because if I mix blue, then it's going to look very similar to the pattern, the color that I used for the pattern, and we don't want it all to blend together. We want the colors to stand out from each other. So I'm going to stick with a light green here, and the way that I got light green was when I was swirling in the paint. I didn't swirl for too long. I just got a little bit of the paint, and then if I got too much paint, you can always dip your brush in the water, and that will also make it lighter. Alright, so I'm going to continue all the way to the end of the head and then continue down into the body. So whatever color you want to use for the body, I think I'm going to try to start here with maybe a little bit of blue. And I just want it to be a light blue. So what I need to do is mix in some water and maybe even use my paper towel a little bit, so that I have a light blue. Use that light blue for the bottom of the body. Alright, so now we are ready to paint colors in and around the fins. So the same thing that you're going to want to do is be careful that you are leaving a little bit of a white line around each of the shapes. So very carefully go in around each of the organic shapes and leave a little bit of a white outline. And try not to have the exact same color. It's actually looking pretty close to the shape color and the background color are very similar, so I need to try to get it to be a nice light green, kind of like the same color that I used up here for the head. Again, if you have too much paint on your brush, you just dip it in the water and it will get lighter. So basically you're just rinsing some of the color off your brush. All right, that's looking pretty good like that. So now I'm gonna work on this one here, and I'm gonna have the blue that I was using, and I'm going to kind of bring that down in and around and try to keep the white outline. And these shapes are kind of already pretty close together, so I might not need to paint too much because I want to make sure I still have a little bit of a white outline. So don't paint if your shapes are close together. Just be careful that you're not covering up too much of that white outline. You want to keep the white outline around each of the shapes. All right, that fin looks just about done. And now, last thing that we need to do would be to paint the shapes, or paint the background behind the shapes on the shell. For that, let's see, maybe we want to use a combination of the blue and green again. So let's start with the green. Whoop, that's too dark. And maybe mix a little bit of blue in there. And leave the white outline around each shape. I think now that I'm about halfway down, I think I might add in some yellow. Whoops. Clean your brush so you're not mixing in colors with your yellow. I'm going to switch over to a little bit of yellow here, and then maybe even see if I can get some of those red and orange mixed in down at the bottom. Let's see what that looks like. You can use whatever colors you want. This is your own creation. It's not really turning out to look exactly like a realistic sea turtle, so you can just go ahead and use your own imagination for whatever colors you'd like to mix together. I think we are finished. Two things to tell you before we go for today is I want to shout out to Dylan and Adrian from 4th grade Spanish Immersion. They uploaded their pictures of their bird and their turtle and their alien from last week. So shout out to those guys for getting some drawing done at home. And if you have any drawings that you've been working on while you've been at home, please upload those to Schoology if you can. I would love to see what you've been drawing and painting at home. And the last thing is, if you can't get enough art just from the videos that I've been putting on YouTube, I just found out that Bob Ross has all of his painting videos up on YouTube as well. So just search for Bob Ross's YouTube channel and you can get access to all of the TV shows that he used to have on PBS. They are now available on YouTube. Have a great day.